So I've been asked today to speak briefly about why it's important to rebuild our infrastructural system and how to do it in 9 minutes. So this animation tracks the travels of a highly processed food product from production through processing, packaging, distribution, and consumption. Now, you could say this was a very well-traveled Twinkie, and you'd be right. But what's important from this is to understand that we live in a global food system, and that it's important to note, and as Dan has said, that most food crises have local and regional distribution problems. And I'm sure most of you in the audience are familiar with the Leopold Center report that talks about food miles and how far our food travels, right? Everybody knows that? How much is it? 1,500 miles. But did you know that in 1925, it was exactly the same distance? And this actually came out of a report that was prepared in response to an impending rail strike, and in this same report was coined the term food shed, right? Which is the region in where a food is prepared for another particular region. So our grandparents' food came from a robust rail system. Our food comes from a robust highway system. So we have rural food deserts, severe, normal, abnormal, and other counties. Some of the unintended consequences of this national system are the lack of access and availability of healthy food choices in the very areas of the country where most of our food is produced and where some of our richest soils are. The second consequence is that we have lost much of our small slaughterhouse facilities and our small production distribution infrastructures. And maybe the most significant consequence we've heard today is the elevated health consequences of this system. And we've heard about elevated obesity rates, and we know that obesity is found in areas with less access to healthy food and availability of healthy food, in both in terms of time, which is important, and in terms of cost. We know that the healthy choice is not the default choice. Another sort of startling statistic from the conservative Congressional Budget Office describes that by 2080, 50% of our GDP will go to healthcare for food-related chronic diseases. Many of my colleagues and many of you here really understand that if we're going to solve the healthcare problem, we're going to have to solve the food problem. But there's hope. Many of the areas where our urban populations are also areas that have diverse food production. And in fact, cities and their regions will drive the changes toward this new system. Let's look at the New York region. We know, and you've heard a little bit today, that the demand for local foods is enormous, over $800 million per year in untapped demand in New York City alone. But the problem is, how do we link between the urban population, the demand populations, and the supply populations? How do we bridge that gap, right? Well, what we believe the way to do that is through infrastructure. And the infrastructure that we think most creates that opportunity is a system called a spoke and hub. Now, we've heard today, and it's important in our research, to really break down the various food groups because they have their own logic, right? Where they're grown, how you have to harvest, how you hold them, process them, distribute them, all of that. So it's important to think of these independently. It's also important to think when you're aggregating these, you're bringing these to market, where you begin to do those consolidations that support local farmers, right? That support the opportunity to enhance the production and increase production that we know that we all need. Let's go more local. Orange County, New York. This slide shows cropland and pasture land densities overlaid with infrastructure, both rail and road, where production sites are, and where facilities can be located to enhance those current production patterns and create opportunities for greater patterns. These processing distribution hubs are more commonly known now as food hubs, right? And there's great opportunities for these. More predictability in purchasing for local, small scale, when there may be uncertainties in terms of crops or in terms of climate, in terms of harvesting, but also for mid-scale farmers who are used to larger demands and aren't used to the smaller, more market-driven expectations. So the hubs can be great opportunities for them as well. And these products can be brought to market. But there's new hubs being developed that center around the notion of health, and these are called healthy food hubs. And they can be different in rural settings, in suburban settings, and in urban settings. They can include health clinics, educational programs, training facilities, new innovations for entrepreneurs, restaurants, processing, to link what we've heard all today, right, about the importance, and just prior to my presentation, about the importance of food and potentially, curing cancer. This is enormous. That we can make that link, that we know that we have to make that inevitable and opportunistic link between health and food. Most of New York City's, almost all of New York City's foods that's not brought in from private large-scale retail grocery stores comes to Hunts Point Terminal Market in the South Bronx. And this much maligned facility shares many of the criticisms of the Washington market of 1925. And these criticisms are centered around inefficiencies of production, negative consequences on the local community. But the funnel problem that was described in 1925 hasn't been solved. It's only been relocated, right, from a rail-dependent connection to Lower Manhattan in 1925 to a highway-dependent connection in the South Bronx presently. And I know a lot of colleagues are looking at ways of solving that, and it's important. But the New York, the Manhattan system really begs the opportunity to consider a decentralized distribution centers, urban and rural, that was recommended, that was requested in 1925. So we know that if we create a more robust regional distribution system, there's opportunities to benefit health. There's opportunities to benefit local, regional economies with economic multipliers between 3 and 7%. We know there's opportunities for reduced demand on the environment. We know there's opportunities for less demand on farmers to bring their goods to New York, to drive hundreds of miles every day. Food is a resource. Healthy, good food is a resource. And its access and availability is a public right, right? And cities, such as New York, are starting to understand that. They need to begin to develop an infrastructure that supports this regionalization and the distribution, consolidation, collection to create a more secure food system. And that's what we've been working on. Thank you very much. I appreciate the discussion today.